In today's complex world of shifting alliances and political strategies, one conflict has drawn the world's attention and reshaped the global order: the war in Ukraine. While the focus has largely been on Europe and the involvement of Western powers, a crucial yet often overlooked player in this conflict is Japan. A country traditionally known for its pacifist stance, Japan's increasingly firm position on Ukraine is more than just about supporting a war-torn nation. It's about preserving the balance of power in East Asia and beyond. We often think of wars in terms of military engagements, battle lines, and territorial gains. But beneath the surface, wars are also fought in boardrooms, international summits, and through economic policies. Japan's role in the conflict between Ukraine and Russia is less about tanks and missiles, and more about a strategic geopolitical dance. The war may be far from Japan's shores, but the implications of its outcome ripple across the globe, from the frozen Kuril Islands in the North Pacific to the contested waters of the South China Sea. Japan's increasingly assertive position in support of Ukraine is not an isolated event. It is deeply tied to its own national interests, regional security concerns, and a shifting global landscape. But how did Japan intervene in favor of Ukraine? To understand Japan's support for Ukraine, we must first recognize the broader context of its relationship with Russia. For decades, Japan and Russia have been entangled in a long-standing territorial dispute over the Kuril Islands, which Russia seized from Japan at the end of World War II. These islands, known in Japan as the Northern Territories, remain a point of contention between the two nations, with both claiming sovereignty. Diplomatic efforts to resolve the dispute have come and gone over the years, but with little success. In recent years, however, this territorial issue has become less about historical grievances and more about strategic positioning in an increasingly tense geopolitical environment. Japan has watched Russia's militarization of the Kuril Islands with growing concern. Satellite images show an increased Russian military presence, including the deployment of missile systems and military infrastructure dangerously close to Japanese territory. This militarization has been a significant factor in Japan's shifting foreign policy and its growing opposition to Russian aggression. The Kuril Islands, once seen as a bilateral territorial dispute, have become part of a broader security concern for Japan, as it faces the reality of a resurgent Russia that is willing to use force to achieve its goals. But it's not just Russia that Japan is worried about. The rise of China as a global superpower has fundamentally altered the balance of power in East Asia. China's growing influence in the Indo-Pacific, its military modernization, and its increasingly aggressive stance toward Taiwan have forced Japan to reconsider its approach to regional security. China and Russia, often seen as strategic partners, present a dual threat to Japan's national security and its broader geopolitical interests. In this context, Japan's support for Ukraine is as much about countering Russia's influence as it is about sending a message to China. By taking a strong stance against Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Japan is signaling to China that it will not tolerate aggression or attempts to redraw international borders by force. Prime Minister Fumio Kishida's remarks that Ukraine of today may be East Asia of tomorrow reflect this concern. For Japan, standing up to Russia in Ukraine is not just about European security. It's about defending the rules-based international order that underpins its own security in the Indo-Pacific. Japan's response to the Ukraine conflict has been multifaceted, focusing on economic sanctions, diplomatic efforts, and financial support for Ukraine. While Japan has not sent military aid to Ukraine, its financial assistance has been substantial. As of early 2024, Japan had provided over $10 billion in aid to Ukraine, making it one of the largest non-military contributors to the country. This aid has included humanitarian support, economic assistance, and reconstruction efforts, all aimed at helping Ukraine survive and rebuild in the face of Russian aggression. In addition to direct financial support, Japan has taken significant steps to isolate Russia economically. Alongside its G7 allies, Japan has imposed a range of sanctions on Russia, targeting key sectors such as finance, energy, and technology. Japan has also joined efforts to limit Russian oil revenues by capping the price of Russian crude, a move aimed at cutting off one of Moscow's main sources of income. These sanctions are not just punitive measures. They are part of a broader strategy to weaken Russia's ability to wage war and to send a message that such behavior will not be tolerated on the international stage. The economic war Japan is waging against Russia goes hand in hand with its diplomatic efforts. In 2023, Japan took on the presidency of the G7, a role that allowed it to shape the international response to the Ukraine conflict. Prime Minister Kishida used this platform to ensure that the world remained focused on Russia's actions, visiting Kiev in a historic trip that marked the first time a Japanese leader had visited an active conflict zone since World War II. This visit underscored Japan's commitment to Ukraine and highlighted the importance it places on upholding the international rules-based order. Japan's involvement in Ukraine is also reshaping its alliances. The country's close relationship with the United States has been central to its foreign policy for decades, but the Ukraine conflict has prompted Japan to deepen its ties with other key players in the Indo-Pacific, including South Korea, India, and Australia. These relationships are critical as Japan seeks to counterbalance the influence of Russia and China in the region. The Trilateral Defense Agreement between Japan, the US, and South Korea is one example of how these alliances are evolving in response to the changing geopolitical landscape. This shift in Japan's foreign policy is also reflected in its domestic politics. For much of the post-war period, Japan has adhered to a policy of pacifism enshrined in its constitution, which renounces the use of force in international conflicts. However, the rise of regional threats, particularly from Russia and China, has led to a growing debate within Japan about the future of its pacifist stance. In recent years, Japan has significantly increased its defense spending, with plans to boost its military budget to record levels by 2027. This marks a dramatic departure from its post-war pacifism and signals a more assertive Japan on the global stage. Despite these changes, Japan remains cautious about directly involving itself in military conflicts. While it has provided non-lethal aid to Ukraine, such as body armor and helmets, Japan has stopped short of sending weapons. This reluctance reflects the country's pacifist constitution and the strong public sentiment in favor of maintaining a non-military role in international affairs. However, there are signs that this may be changing. Some political figures within Japan are pushing for a more active role in supporting Ukraine, including the possibility of providing lethal aid. This shift in policy would mark a significant escalation in Japan's involvement in the conflict and could have far-reaching implications for its foreign policy. Japan's stance on Ukraine is about more than just the conflict in Eastern Europe. It's about securing its own position in an increasingly unstable world. The war in Ukraine has exposed the fragility of the international order and the risks of unchecked aggression by authoritarian regimes. For Japan, the lessons of Ukraine are clear. If the world allows Russia to succeed in Ukraine, it will embolden other countries, particularly China, to pursue their own territorial ambitions, threatening the stability of the Indo-Pacific. This is why Japan's involvement in Ukraine is so crucial. By supporting Ukraine, Japan is not only helping to uphold the international order, but also defending its own strategic interests. Japan's actions in Ukraine are a reflection of its broader geopolitical strategy, which seeks to counterbalance the influence of Russia and China, protect its territorial sovereignty, and ensure that the Indo-Pacific remains a region of peace and stability. As Japan continues to navigate this complex geopolitical landscape, its actions in Ukraine will have long-lasting implications for both its own future and the future of global politics. The question now is whether Japan will continue to limit its involvement to economic and diplomatic support, or whether it will take the next step and provide military aid to Ukraine. Whatever Japan decides, its role in the Ukraine conflict marks a significant turning point in its foreign policy and its place in the world. In conclusion, Japan's involvement in Ukraine is about far more than military aid or financial assistance. It's about a country reshaping its geopolitical strategy in response to an increasingly volatile world. Japan's support for Ukraine is a key part of its broader efforts to defend the international order, counterbalance the influence of Russia and China, and ensure its own security in the Indo-Pacific. As the war in Ukraine drags on, Japan's actions will continue to be a critical factor in the global response to Russian aggression and the future of the international order. And what do you think of all this? Do you think Japan made the right choice? Let me know with a comment below, and if you liked the video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more future content.